Well, thank you all for joining us tonight. I'm Megan Doherty, the director of the Museum of the White Mountains. It's great to have you here in person and joining us on Zoom. As we gather today, we're all on Indigenous lands. Those of us at the Museum of the White Mountains are on Indokina, which is the ancestral and present homelands of the Abenaki and Wabanaki peoples. We're grateful for their stewardship of these lands and waterways. For those of you on Zoom, we've put some links in the chat where you can learn more about the Indigenous histories of your place at native-land.ca, as well as the Abenaki peoples of Northern New England through the Musée des Abenaki in Quebec. This summer's exhibition of baskets and borers is part of our ongoing efforts to learn more about the continued Indigenous presence in our region, as well as learn how to be better stewards of these lands and waterways. We're joined tonight by Jonathan Rosenthal and Radka Wildova of the Ecological Research Institute based in the Hudson River Valley of New York. Part of their work there is dedicated to the monitoring and managing ash program, which is focused on the importance lingering ash have for the fate of the species. And I'm grateful they made the trip up to share more about their project with us. Please join me in welcoming Jonathan and Radka.
So this is about the monitoring and managing ash program, as Megan mentioned. The acronym for it is MaMA, and we want to urge you all to come to MaMA. And it's how you can help enable lingering ash detection for resistance breeding. I'm going to migrate over here to the keyboard and hope that I can still be, I don't have to be seen. So, and there are a bunch of logos here on this first slide, and I just want to explain them. Ecological Research Institute, I'm director of that institute. Radka is the senior scientist. You see the MaMA logo on the right, which shows one really healthy ash tree surrounded by a lot of really dead ones. And that symbolizes a lingering ash. And then, of course, you're all familiar with the Museum of the White Mountains and Hubbard Brook Ecosystem Study, where we tomorrow will be going out and also doing some field work, to which we're inviting folks who attend this talk today to also participate in tomorrow, if there are spaces available. And I'll get into that a bit more at the end of the talk. And this presentation is made possible by the Tree Species in Peril initiative, which is a collaboration led by the Nature Conservancy along with the U.S. Forest Service. So monitoring and managing ash, MaMA. It's a program of ERI that enables detection of lingering ash, which we abbreviate hereafter through as LA, through data collection by natural resource professionals and citizen scientists. And it also encourages management practices that facilitate lingering ash detection. And we'll get into why lingering ash detection is so important. So what are lingering ash and how are they used for resistance breeding? Now, I'm going to give you a very technical definition for lingering ash. Lingering ash are mature ash trees, in other words, at least 4 inches diameter at breast height, that are naturally occurring, in other words, were not planted, that are native trees, that are chemically untreated against EAB, and that stay healthy for at least 2 years after at least 95% of nearby ash have been killed by EAB. So in other words, these are trees that not only survive EAB infestation of the stands in which they occur, but they stay completely healthy. And they do that for years afterwards, after virtually all the trees around them have been killed. And these lingering ash have been found for all 3 widespread Northeast ash species, white, green, and black, which I think in parts of New Hampshire and all of Maine are also known as brown ash. Doctors Jennifer Cook and Kathleen Knight of the U.S. Forest Service have shown that scion from lingering ash can be used in selective breeding to yield highly EAB resistant trees. And I'll also mention these are highly EAB resistant, naturally native and locally adapted EAB resistant trees. So some of you may be unfamiliar with the term scion. So scion are twigs that are cut from a tree and then grafted onto rootstock. If you cut those same twigs and instead of grafting them, put them in a big medium such as soil or water or something else, then we would call them cuttings. But the technical term when you use them for grafting is scion. So this program takes advantage of both natural and artificial selection. So there's very intense natural selection for EAB resistance, if you think about it, because typically at least 99% of the native, naturally occurring mature ash trees that are out there are susceptible to EAB and will be killed by it. But it reveals this very small number of trees that are lingering ash that are likely to have some heritable resistance. In other words, resistance that can be passed on to their progeny. And it's revealed by the fact that they're not only surviving, but retaining their health when the trees around them have died. And then on top of this, we take advantage of selective breeding to accelerate evolution. So EAB is, in a perverse way, doing this favor for us of revealing those trees that likely have some level of resistance, which often is not complete resistance. And then we can use those for a breeding program that then really accelerate evolution greatly, so that within a couple of generations, we can have highly resistant, locally adapted, genetically diverse trees ready for ash restoration. So a quick overview of the U.S. Forest Service EAB resistance breeding program. They would take lingering ash scion from Ohio and Michigan, and that's just because they are based at the U.S. Forest Service Northern Research Station in Ohio, right near the Michigan border, where ash have been longest hit by EAB, for many years before it came out east. And so they started this program quite a few years ago where they were searching for these lingering ash and then taking scion from them, grafting them onto rootstock, which enables rapid clonal propagation. What do I mean by rapid clonal propagation? Because you're cutting these scion from the trees and then taking multiple scion from each lingering ash that they use and grafting them onto numerous rootstock. They are then getting all those new trees that are formed from those grafts are all identical to each other and identical to that parent tree from which they took it. So if that parent tree, if that lingering ash has a high level of heritable resistance, then all of their grafted trees are genetically identical and have that same level of resistance. And so they do that first. And then they do repeated crossing within species from the same general area. So they have that local adaptation of the progeny that show the highest resistance. So in other words, it's good old fashioned artificial selection or breeding, just as we would do for varieties of tomatoes or roses or anything else like that. So here you see on the left, I don't know if this is going to show up here, the cursor, you see that's a lingering ash. That's a tree that's really healthy, surrounded by dead ash trees. And they took the scion from that, grafted it on to some other rootstock, other ash rootstock, and it grew up. And then what did they do next? They assess the resistance by placing a pre-counted number of EAB eggs on these grafted trees, and then seeing how many make it to each successive larval stage and how many eventually make it to the final larval stage. The image you see on the right there, the right lower corner, is an EAB larva killed by a lingering ash. So right in that kind of oval right there. And what happens is EAB kill trees by tunneling through the phloem of the tree right under the bark and effectively disrupting the circulatory system of the tree and girdling them. And in a highly infested ash tree, a single tree, you can have tens of thousands of EAB larvae in there, and that's how they kill the tree. But if the tree has a defense mechanism of being able to quickly grow very hard callus tissue around the EAB larva, it entombs that EAB larva. The EAB larva starves to death, and that larva cannot do any more damage. But if you think about it, if you're a tree that just entombs one larva out of 30 or 40,000, you're still going to die very quickly, right? So there's a whole spectrum of resistance where you can have trees that are really good at this or really bad at it. Some of them may kill most of the larvae. And there are other potential defense mechanisms as well. I just want to show this because it's a really cool picture. Next, a sample of the 2012 results. This is from the U.S. Forest Service resistance breeding program, slide provided by Jennifer Cook. And it's 2012, but these results are still completely relevant. You see, if you look at this key on the right, the larval outcome, the orange is really good. It means the eggs or newly hatched larvae are killed by the host tree. Green means they die in their early stages, and blue mean they reach their final larval stage, right? That's good for the beetles or really bad for the trees. So if we look at a susceptible control tree, this just means a typical susceptible tree without any perceptible level of resistance. You see that all the eggs end up ultimately making it all the way through to the final larval stage. But these different, each one of the pie chart here shows the results from the clonal progeny of different lingering ash, maybe 5 or 6 or 7 grafted trees that all derive from this lingering ash or this lingering ash or this. And you see that certain percentages of them that vary quite widely are of those eggs are not successful. Now we can go to the next slide here, and we see that here they crossed 2 lingering ash parents, and some of the next generation, when those trees that they grew from seed were large enough to be assessed with the EAB larvae. Some that turned out worse than their parents, some turned out like their parents, and some turned out even better than their parents. And if we look at this one all the way on the right, it seems that about, let's say about 5 out of 6 of the larvae, whatever percentage that translates into, did not make it to the final larval stage. And so what you want to do then is then take those that did really well, that have results like this, and then cross them with another genetically different individual from the same general area. So it also has that local adaptation. And that should, in the next generation, we call it F2, yield some really highly resistant trees. You can then use those trees for what we call a seed orchard that can yield seeds of highly resistant ash that can then be planted and grown and and used in the natural habitats or even for landscape trees. So this is really a really exciting development that few people know about. It's largely gone under the radar. So lingering ash can also play other roles. If female, it can furnish seed, where if you think about it, 50% of the genetic material from that seed came from that female lingering ash, 50% came from the male, and we don't really know whether they're susceptible or highly resistant or anything in between. But at least at least 50% of that material that's coming from that genetic material in that seed is probably, it would definitely be from that lingering ash tree. It can help improve the overall population genetics in situ. In other words, you have a lingering ash tree out there, you can then do things to protect it and sustain it in the environment, because if it's then mating with the trees around it, it's helping to increase and improve the population genetics of the population as a whole. And thus there are multiple reasons to find lingering ash. And using scion for resistance breeding has advantages over using seed. We're not here to knock seed collection programs. They have an important role to play. But the reason that the program we're involved in, MaMA and the U.S. Forest Service breeding program, has largely relied on scion is it has these following examples. First, as I mentioned, the scion from the lingering ash are genetically identical to those lingering ash, rather than having only 50% of their material from it. Secondly, the grafting of scion from mature lingering ash rapidly produces mature trees that are ready for breeding. So if you're collecting scion from mature trees that are, they're mature, they're already producing male or female flowers, depending upon the individual tree, right? Then when you graft scion from those onto rootstock, it only takes a few years for those grafted trees to again produce seeds, to produce flowers, and then you can use them in the selective breeding program, where you're cross-pollinating different individuals that have high levels of resistance. So it really allows us to catapult forward much faster than using seed. And we need scion from locally adapted lingering ash for all species. of native ash throughout their ranges. And this is a major effort required given the area to be covered and the rarity of lingering ash. So in other words, we're looking for lots of needles and lots of different haystacks, scattered across the North American continent. And so we can't just do this with a few professional scientists based in Ohio or anywhere else involved. We need a lot of eyes out there looking for these trees and collecting the data that enables us to look for these trees. So the solution that we came up with is land managers and citizen scientists to the rescue. So MaMA was designed in 2017 by ERI, that's us, to achieve two goals. The first is widespread data collection to enable lingering ash detection. And the second is integrating lingering ash detection into EAB ash management. Otherwise, some management approaches can preclude lingering ash detection. For example, if you go out and preemptively or proactively clear cut all your ash because you've heard EAB is coming, it's going to kill all your ash trees, there's nothing you can do about it. You want to realize whatever value you can from the value of your timber, and you cut down all those ash trees, you'll never know which, if any of those would ultimately have turned out to be a lingering ash. And I'll make it clear later that we're not against cutting down any trees that can be part of an overall management program, but it's important to spare some trees so that we can find some lingering ash. So I already said that, and so here's some of our success that we've experienced already. MaMA has already enabled detection of 110 lingering ash in New York, where we're based. And it's not that we're just finding these trees in New York because that's where we're based. It's because in the New York, New England area, the EAB invasion first started in New York State, okay? It had moved eastward from Michigan, Ohio, Pennsylvania, and then New York, and pretty much all the infestations and invasions probably throughout New England trace back to New York. So New York has been invaded much longer than New England, and it means that there are areas there that have been thoroughly devastated by EAB, where we can find those outstanding trees that are still quite healthy. So you have to wait until those really high levels of mortality have been reached to be able to find those lingering ash. So we have a lingering white ash shown on the left, a lingering green ash on the right, and most excitingly, a lingering black ash represented here in the middle. And we found lingering black ash in the Finger Lakes of New York, where we looked for them, and also or our partners at Cornell looked for them, I should be clear about that, and also in the Hudson Valley. And they're quite uncommon, but you're not going to find them if you don't look for them. And for many reasons, black ash are of highest priority for us, including their importance in indigenous culture, and also because they play a unique ecosystem role. So this past winter, we collected scion from all three species, white, black, and green. You see Radka out there in the dead of winter with a really big slingshot, capturing scion way up in the crown of these trees and pulling them down and then processing them. Not shown in the photograph is the intrepid photographer who was there in the extremely cold temperatures, teeth chattering, taking these photos. Oh, let's see who that was. Oh, that was Jay Rosenthal. Okay, so we were both out there in the cold doing these things, but Radka did the vast bulk of collection. And then success that was achieved was we shipped all these scion to a master grafter who achieved a 93% success rate of the scion being grafted and taking, which is almost unheard of. And from there, they were moved on to Cornell University, where the selective breeding is taking place. So MaMA's data projects enable looking for lingering ash at the right places at the right times, because as I mentioned, that's crucial, right? So looking at areas before the mortality threshold has been reached yields spurious lingering ash. In other words, these have not been attacked enough and tested enough by EAB. Well, it's a healthy ash tree, but it hasn't really been tested. Okay, but on the other hand, waiting too long to look for lingering ash in an area means lost opportunities. Why? because trees are likely to die eventually from EAB. Typically, the trees don't have complete resistance. They have partial resistance. So instead of dying when all these other trees have died, they maybe will die 4 or 5 or 6 or 7 years later. So there's that window to get them. And if you get to them 4 or 5 or 6 years later, they won't look particularly healthy anymore. They will have declined, right? So there's that window when you can detect them, when they're really healthy and everyone else is dead. And the other thing that can happen is if you're the last of one or a few ash trees that are still living, you can die from other means. Maybe you're the last standing ash tree there and you're going to get the lightning strike, or there's somebody with a really itchy trigger finger for their chainsaw and they're going to come and cut this tree down. And things like this have actually happened. So you don't want to get in there too early and you don't want to get there too late. And the other reason you don't want to get there too late is there what's called ingrowth, which can be confused with lingering ash. So I should explain that EAB preferentially attacks the larger ash. They will attack trees, tiny little seedlings and saplings with as small as ½ inch diameter trunks, right? But they really start hitting the trees hard after they're mature, after they're at least 4 inches diameter at breast height. So that's why we're looking for these large trees that were large enough during peak EAB infestation that they were really attacked heavily by EAB. If you wait too long, what happens? If you wait too long to look at an area for lingering ash, you'll have trees that maybe in the ensuing years, say 3 or 4 or 5 years, since peak EAB levels, have then reached maturity, right? They were very small at the time of peak EAB levels, right? EAB populations crashed because almost all the ash is gone because they've killed almost all of them. There's almost no food left for them. EAB populations crash. And then those less preferred trees, those really skinny, little scrawny baby trees are not being attacked by EAB. And then subsequently, they're able to grow into this adult size class. And you come along, you see that, and you say, wow, this is an area where a lot of ash have been killed by EAB. This is a mature tree. It's a lingering ash. It's not. It's a tree that reached maturity after after EAB populations have crested and crashed. So you have to look at the right time. So to look for lingering ash in the right place at the right time, we have developed a tool called MaMA action maps. So these are created using EAB detection history plus data from MaMA projects. So typically in every state where MaMA is now being implemented, the state agencies will share their EAB detection history data with us. So we can see in which places EAB has been for how long a period of time. We can see, for instance, places where EAB arrived in 2010 or 2015 or 2020, and then we model forward based on the standard mortality trajectories, like how long it takes a population to die off from EAB, to model going forward when that 95% threshold has been reached. So one source is EAB detection history from agencies and also from our citizen scientists and other participants reporting that detection history data. And we'll explain to you how you can report that. But we also then use data from our other MaMA data collection projects, which includes going out and looking for lingering ash, and also an intermediate step of going out and documenting on the ground mortality of ash due to EAB. Because remember, we're starting out just with a model of projecting that if EAB arrived at a certain point at a certain year, we think 95% will be reached in X year. But there's actually quite a bit of variation. And some places, ash will die really fast. Some places will die more slowly, probably because of genetic components in the population and also environmental issues, environmental aspects. If an environment is more stressful, the trees will die faster. So we use these data from a couple of projects to actually document on the ground mortality. And this is just a little mini version in the corner here of the MaMA action map for New Hampshire. We'll show you a full-size version very shortly. So the action maps, the big takeaway from this slide is they show areas that should be ready to be searched for lingering ash, and there are such areas already in New Hampshire. And they also share areas that need specific types of data collected through our projects that will help us then figure out where and when to look for lingering ash. So we'll go over these MaMA data collection projects. There are 4 of them. They're all on the Anecdata Citizen Science platform, with printable forms also available. You can submit data using a smartphone, a tablet, a PC, via email, or even snail mail. Some people just like to write things out on paper forms and put it in an envelope and send it to us, and we get it, and that's fine. We just want your data. Just a quick thing about Anecdata is that it's a platform that enables very rigorous citizen science. So we used to work with iNaturalist, which does a lot of great stuff, but it doesn't enable statistical analysis and relational data and all sorts of other stuff that we need. And the folks at iNaturalist said, you know, you really need to work for Anecdata. You really need to work with Anecdata. And so that's why we switched to that platform. So these are the 4 projects that we have, 4 data collection projects, and these are what their icons will look like when you pull them up on your phone or your computer. So I'll go through them each very quickly. The first one is MaMA Ash EAB surveys. This is the easiest one to participate in. It takes the least knowledge and the least time investment. And you're just recording the presence or absence of EAB evidence, and if present, whether the trees are dead. So you can just go out and look at 1 or 2 or 3 or 5 or however many ash trees you want to look at. And as soon as you document definitive evidence of EAB, of at least one of those trees at that site, we know EAB is there. So this complements agency effort, right? In almost all the states, the agencies are going out and documenting where EAB is reported, but they're inevitably overwhelmed. There's lots more EAB than there are people working for the state agencies, and these invasions spread across the landscape very fast and take up a lot more area than can possibly be covered. So the data that's contributed to us, we share with the agencies, and the agencies share their data with us. So we get a much more complete picture. So where do we want you to do this? In any area from which EAB has not yet been reported. And the reason we want you also to then report if any of these trees with EAB evidence is dead, because then if it's dead, it usually takes a few years for EAB to kill a tree. It means that infestation is even more advanced there, and that time horizon to get to that 95% mortality threshold is even closer than if there are just signs there, but none of the trees are yet dead. And these can be done in as little as 15 minutes, and they can be done any time of the year, even in the winter. Next one, MaMA Monitoring Plots Network. You record EAB evidence, crown health, and DBH of 40 mature, naturally occurring ash that have not been chemically treated against EAB, and you repeat the EAB and EAB evidence and health assessment just once annually until at least 95% die from EAB. Setting up a plot typically takes, well, I'll go over this first. It can be done everywhere, even if EAB is not yet there. And it's great to set up plots beforehand, because then you can be sure you won't miss documenting when that 95% threshold has been reached. And the time needed, initial setup and data collection typically takes up to a few hours, may take more than that. It really depends how many people are working on collecting those data. Subsequent years, it will take less time. Why? Because there's all this baseline data, and you're tagging the trees and so forth when you're first setting up the plot. You can only do this during the period when you can only collect data for this project during the June through September period when ash are fully leafed out. And I just want a couple of caveats about this. So if anybody's thinking of getting involved in this, is that you really need to be involved in the management of that site, because you have to make sure that once you've set aside these 40 trees for a monitoring plot, that none of those trees will be cut or will be chemically treated until they're dead. So you're not going to cut a tree until it's dead, right? Because if you cut it down before it's dead, we'll never know when it would have died otherwise, right? Because you're trying to document the mortality levels. And you can't treat any of the trees because that'll totally screw up the data. The tree will stay healthy and not die because of the treatment, maybe not because of its any resistance level that it has. But these data, so those are the caveats. It's a substantial commitment, but these provide really great data. This is the only monitoring plot network of its kind for ash. We now have it in multiple different states, and they provide just really precise data of those mortality levels across the landscape, and we can really target those searches for lingering ash accordingly. Next is MaMA Rapid Ash Mortality Assessment. We came up with this acronym because we wanted it to be Mama-Rama. We just love how it slips off the tongue, and we want it to sound like a 60s dance craze, and we want everybody to get up, get out, and do the Mama-Rama. Okay, so it's a one-time assessment of 40 naturally occurring mature ash. That sounds familiar, right? Chemically untreated. EAB, and you're just documenting EAB evidence, categorical DBH classes, and Crown Health, and there's no tagging. So this is rapid because you're collecting somewhat rougher data. You're estimating the diameter of the trees. You're putting you're classing the health of the trees in these broad classes, and you're not tagging the trees. Okay, not tagging the trees also has another benefit, which if any of you has ever had the experience of trying to do a study on any federal land, state land, privately owned land that you don't own, you usually have to go through multiple bureaucratic hurdles just to put a single small tag on a tree. Okay, so what this does is opens up participation to folks like citizen scientists who want to go out and monitor the health of trees on a national forest or a state park or a town park or whatnot, without going through all those hurdles, or just on some land along the highway, you see a nice bunch of ash trees there, and you want to document their mortality levels. And of course, you only really want to do this once there's some mortality. If there's no mortality, there's no reason to do this. You're getting data that's a little bit less precise than that monitoring plot data, but it's still really useful and it's really comparable. And since not everyone can do monitoring plots, these are really important in filling in these data gaps along the landscape, across the landscape between those monitoring plots. These are really important, and really anybody can do them. And if you get trained up to do these, then you could become the czar of Mama-Rama, and you can hop in your car and say, there's this, ash stand. I've seen some of the trees are dying along this road that I drive on every day to work. I'm going to stop by. I'm going to do that, assess the mortality level, right? And then you know what? I'll go to this other place, and maybe you could. So this can be done in about an hour, right? And summer days are long, right? You don't have anything else to do, so you can hop in your car and maybe get 6, 8, 10 Mama-Ramas done in a day, and then the next day do more. Okay, I'm exaggerating a little, but these are addictive, really. You get better and better at them. The more of them you do, you can do them much faster. These are really crucial data, and you don't also have the other thing that makes them a lot easier for broad participation. Don't have a multi-year commitment. Right? Even if we just get that data one time for that place, that really helps our modeling going forward. It's nice if you want to go back and do it again the next year, but there's no commitment. Next project, MaMA Lingering Ash Search. So this is reporting lingering ash that are found and results of systematic searches. All lingering ash reports include the assessment of nearby ash. So let me just explain this here. You're doing this obviously only in areas that have really high mortality, right? Then you're looking for those trees that are not just living, but that are really healthy. And then what you're doing is not only documenting the health of that tree or those few, you may find more than one in a place, those few lingering ash, but you're also documenting the health of all those ash trees around them, right? And that enables us to assess that those truly are lingering ash. If you go out and you find a place and, well, I found a lingering ash, and I found another, and I found another, and all those trees here are lingering ash. Those are not lingering ash. That's just a place that maybe the EAB has not been at for a long time. So you're documenting for our satisfaction and for our data that those are places that are really hard hit by EAB, and these are outstanding trees. So you can report trees that you find opportunistically. Maybe you're going for a hike in the White Mountains or somewhere else, or coming to beautiful New York State for a vacation and hiking there in the lovely Hudson Valley, and you find an outstanding, really healthy ash tree in the woods, and everything else around is dead. You can report that. But you can also do what we call systematic searches, where you go out, you walk along a particular trail, or you walk zigzagging back and forth through the woods to see, every ash in that particular tract. And you're keeping track through an app called CalTopo of your search path. And then if you find no lingering ash, that's still really useful data. You're documenting there are no lingering ash there. We know that, and we can then deploy people not to that place again. There's no reason to search it again because there are no lingering ash there. So you can also do a systematic search. So here we are now at the promised action map for New Hampshire. This is like hot off the press, or hot off the, pixels. It's hot off the electrons. And as a matter of fact, we had to delay getting this presentation loaded today because we just recently got some data that we were using. And this largely relies on data that was very kindly shared with us by the relevant state agency for New Hampshire. And I always get the agencies wrong from place to place, but if any of you know Kyle Lombard or Bill Davidson, they very kindly shared their data with us. It does show one monitoring plot. Actually, we have a couple of monitoring plots now in New Hampshire. You can see one's at 54%, one's at 68%. And you can see in this core area, mostly centered around Concord and another down near the Mass border, you see this reddish color. Those are areas that should be ready to be searched for lingering ash. Again, based on our modeling. It's really helpful if folks get out there, do lingering ash searches, or maybe first do a MaMA and document that they've actually reached those high mortality levels there, and then look for those lingering ash and report them. So you can have that glory of going out there and finding lingering ash, and they're there, but you'll never find them if you don't look for them. And so those are areas that have been infested for at least 8 years, right? When this is done in New Hampshire on the town level, doesn't mean that every inch of those towns, it's not a very kind of biological boundaries of this infestation. They're very jagged, and so they reflect town lines. But in New Hampshire, the data is amassed and processed and shared and so forth, where it's shown at the town level. And it's probably pretty accurate, but does it mean EAB is in every inch of that town? Not necessarily, but you can see those core areas. Then we have this green area around, which is ready for really good places to do RAMA assessments, and the same thing also for the blue areas. And we say this because there are areas that have been infested. Some of these areas have been infested up to 3 years. And in some cases, as I mentioned, and that probably even infested longer, where areas where EAB was detected at least 3 years ago. And typically EAB is not detected until it's already been present for a few years. Okay, so here, all of these areas, there can be places within them where there's high mortality. And I should mention that black ash goes much more rapidly to these high mortality levels, unfortunately, than the other two species. So black ash, you may have an area that has black ash, which again is extremely important, that's already at really high mortality, even if the white ash or the green ash in nearby forests are not. So you can target those areas. There, you may have an area that's really environmentally stressed, where you've noticed that virtually all the ash trees are already dead, even if for that town or county as a whole, you haven't reached that level. If that's the case, and you find outstanding healthy trees there, report them through the lingering ash project, data collection project. And then we have all these areas for which EAB has not been reported, and it just means it has not been reported and it has not been detected, or detected and reported. It's very possible it could be there as well. And it's well known that, to a large extent, the detection is a reflection not only of the degree of presence of the EAB, but also the degree of presence of the people looking for EAB. So especially when we get up here in northern New Hampshire, places where there's not a lot of people out there looking, you're not going to have a lot of detections. So we encourage people to do those ash EAB surveys and report whether or not you find EAB in those areas. And if you don't find EAB in those areas, it doesn't mean EAB is not present. It does mean that EAB has not gotten down to that eye level where you can readily see it. And I should just clarify here that EAB typically first invades the very top of the crown of trees, high up in the canopy of ash trees, and then slowly makes its way down. It takes like a few successive generations to get down to the point where those classic definitive signs of EAB, those D-shaped holes or serpentine galleries, are right in front of you where you almost can't miss them. That means that tree has already been infested for a bunch of years. So I went over the data collection aspects, and I want to mention now the other prong of the MaMA program. One is data collection, and the other is managing ash to facilitate lingering ash detection. So it's okay to treat some trees with systemic insecticides against EAB. You've probably all heard of emamectin benzoate, which is marketed under the brand name Triage. And that is really effective. You can do if your tree is not too far gone already, you can do injections every couple of years and typically maintain the health of that tree. It can be a really important tree to you for sentimental reasons, or it's a big tree, it's a star tree, or for whatever reason you want to maintain that tree. It typically costs, depending upon the size, the diameter of that tree, that influences the cost. And if it's a big tree, it can cost a couple of $100 per tree, but that can be something you want to retain. And it's also okay to cut trees if you need it for economic, cultural, or other purposes, certainly a hazard tree and so forth. We're not tree huggers. We're not saying that nobody should cut under any circumstances ash trees. It's fine to cut trees. It's fine to cut a lot of ash trees. But what you want you to do is also keep those lingering ash or the potential for lingering ash in mind and try to leave some healthy ash uncut and untreated. Each healthy ash that's out there in the landscape may ultimately, if it's allowed to stand there, turn out to be a lingering ash, right? Each one of those trees provides a certain amount of hope. So for each one of those trees you're cutting down, you're diminishing hope just by that much, right? And if we all think of ourselves collectively in the lands that we manage across the landscape, whether they be public lands or private or whatnot, we just want to leave enough healthy trees out there uncut that once they're attacked, and that we'll know if some of them retain their health and manifest as lingering ash. So one thing that you can do in particular, as I mentioned before, if you have management responsibility, you can leave 40 for a monitoring plot, but you can't cut these until they're dead, right? That's a really strong commitment, and you also can't treat them, right? But more generally, as I mentioned, we want you to leave enough healthy trees uncut to increase the likelihood that some will be lingering ash. And trees that are not in a monitoring plot, you can cut them as soon as they decline, right? You don't have to wait for them to die. So you may still be able to get some timber value out of them. And you don't want to be messing with them when they're in severe decline. But once they start to decline, you know it's not a lingering ash, and you can cut those. Okay. So for more information on MaMA, you can visit the MaMA website, which is www.monitoringash.org, which unfortunately has not kept up with our rapid advances that we're making with the program. So it's pretty severely out of date. We are in the process of updating. We'll let everyone know when it's updated. You can email us. I'm Jonathan Rosenthal, as you already know. There's my email address. That's an email that will come directly to me. Or Radka, you can email her directly. Or you can send another email to another email address that takes a longer time to get to us. So use these direct email addresses. And the MaMA website does have some really good material on how to identify ash, how to distinguish these from other species, which is all you need to be able to do for the ash EAB surveys. You just need to, as you say, know your ash from your elbow, or at least know your ash from your maple. or your ash from your oak and so forth. You don't have to be able to recognize different species of ash. So for the ash EAB surveys, it's for wide open participation. And I think you can fairly quickly learn how to do that on our website. We also have some information on how to tell different species of ash from each other, which you do need to know for those other more intensive projects. And you'll also know more about the history and the theory and so forth behind our projects. But what we are going to be doing shortly, and we will let everyone know, is publishing updated recorded trainings for each of our citizen science land manager projects. We had some, we took them down because we have developed and modified and improved our projects and increased and expanded our projects as they've gone on, and there was a kind of a mismatch. So we're in the process of catching the website up to where we are in reality. And I think everybody who has signed up for this webinar or this event you're on our list, and we're not going to spam you, but we will let you know of such things as updates on the website or areas that are ready to be searched for lingering ash and so forth. We want to do everything we can to support you in any efforts you want to make in this program. And with that, I want to thank the Museum of the White Mountains for hosting us, and I'll take any questions that are on.
Oh, so there's a question about mountain ash.
Yes, so mountain ash, this is the problem with common names. So mountain ash is not at all related, other than being a tree, it's not at all related to ash. So mountain ash are in the rose family, genus Sorbus, and they are completely unrelated to true ash trees, genus Fraxinus. They're not even in the same family. And fortunately for mountain ash, the EAB is not as confused in terms of names of trees as people are. And so the EAB doesn't say, oh, mountain ash, that's an ash, I'm going to attack it. They're like, that's not an ash, I'm going nowhere near it. So don't worry, if you have mountain ash, maybe something else will attack it, but not EAB.
So there's a question in the chat, and I think maybe this is, I don't know if we want to pull that chart back up.
Let's see.
No, I just think, because are you using susceptible rootstock?
Oh, that's a great question. It doesn't even mention it in the chart.
Because I think there's a chart, it says susceptible.
Oh, it does.
But I think that was like your control group.
No, so
in the
there's
reading program.
susceptible rootstock is always used.
Oh, okay.
And so this is typically, regardless of the species of ash, they can all be grafted onto green ash rootstock. And the reason that susceptible rootstock is used is you don't want to use a resistant ash rootstock that maybe is giving off some chemicals or something that confers that resistance on it. And then when you're trying to measure the resistance of the scion that's grafted on top of it, right, and measure the resistance of everything above the graft, you don't want to taint your data by a resistant rootstock then really helping that scion above. So we're just assessing the resistance of the scion. And you may say, well, wait a minute, that sounds problematic, because what if that rootstock then gets attacked by below the graft by EAB? And the way to deal with that is topical application of insecticides that will just to the surface of the rootstock. It's not systemic insecticide, so it won't go up into the scion, and it will prevent EAB from attacking the rootstock.
Great, thank you.
Good question.
And so then there's another question about where one can find Western Mass, New York border maps for EAB lingering ash information.
Right, another really good question. So Western Massachusetts / New York border. So again, blame New York, you can blame us for everything bad. Has a lot of areas that are ready to be searched, and some of these directly abut against Western Massachusetts. So we do have an action map for New York. We have an action map for Massachusetts. I think on each of these, probably, we also shall ask Radka about this. We do show the portion of the action map of the adjacent state so that you can see them together, I believe. Am I correct about this? So if you go to either a Massachusetts action map, which we didn't share because we're in New Hampshire, you can, if you look at a Massachusetts map and go to the western edge of the state, you'll see that area, Western Mass, and the adjacent area of New York. And you'll see that in Western Mass, there similarly are areas that are ready to be searched for lingering ash.
have to share them on email or post?
So we will be, these are, we can send maps to everyone. We can also post them on our website. And one really cool thing about the action maps is that we create them not just as PDFs, but as georeferenced maps, so that you can see where you are and see where you are in your present location on that action map. So that, for instance, you can be driving across, or it's very hard to drive, I've discovered, across New Hampshire.
No,
You're only allowed to go
can't
north
get
and
there
south,
from here
right?
now.
So you're driving somewhere north and south in New Hampshire, and you're coming, and we're very upset about this, but there are no signs on Highway 93 or 91 that say entering lingering ash search zone or leaving lingering ash search zone. But you can have, not doing distracted driving, maybe your phone, maybe the co-pilot has their phone and has the map on it, and you'll see this little dot, which is your car going down 93 or 91, and you'll be like, wow, I'm in a lingering ash search zone now. And of course, just pull right over on the shoulder, put your blinkers on and start searching for lingering ash. No, legal disclaimer, that was meant in humor, but you can see where you are and what stage the ash are in real time, and wherever you are in any of those states or areas for which we've developed action maps, which include New York, Massachusetts, New Hampshire, and Vermont.
Yeah, and if you send those to Kayla and maybe the Cal topo directions, we can send those out with the recording.
Sounds good.
To the registered participants. So there's a question now about, is it known how many genes are involved in EAB resistance or what they do?
So the general answer is what it seems to be is what's called polygenic resistance. So lots of different genes involved in that. And so some people see this as a downside, like there's not a magic bullet, like you just get that one resistance gene and it's all solved. And it turns out it's actually the other way around, because it's always an evolutionary arms race between a pest and its tree host, right? That the pest is trying to attack the tree and the tree is trying to evolve resistance to it, and the bug is trying to overcome that resistance. And if it's a single gene, it's really easy for that pest then to have that one mutation to overcome that one gene of resistance. And with polygenic inheritance, it's really difficult. And that's why what we have is typically not either complete resistance or no resistance, but there's this whole spectrum of resistance. And what we're doing is looking for those naturally occurring trees that are high on the spectrum, that have, high degrees of resistance there, and then doing that artificial breeding to push it even further towards the, really high levels of resistance. But it's not like a single magic bullet.
Right. So now we question about a topic, it's like the only part of the sort of, the like pantheon of things you can do that we haven't talked about today, which is biocontrols.
Okay.
So what about biocontrols? If they've been released in your area, does that mean that it's not suitable for a monitoring plot? I assume the not suitable for MaMA means the monitoring plot. And then what interactions do you foresee between lingering ash and biocontrols?
Okay, so a few, thank you so much for asking these questions, by the way. I used to have slides on these that I pulled out to make the presentation shorter, but now I realize they were in demand. So two things, or a few things. The first thing is that I just used the term magic bullet about single gene, inheritance of resistance. I'll use it in another way, that everybody wants to find, that magic bullet that will take care of everything for regarding EAB. So we know that biocontrol by itself cannot fully control EAB. How do we know this? We know this, hopefully this story is easy to follow, that long before EAB showed up on our shores here in North America, China had purchased a lot of green ash trees to use for highway beautification projects across China. It's rapidly urbanizing, rapidly developing, and rapidly growing these super highways there. So they said, what kind of trees can we use for beautification along these highways? We'll use green ash because they grow really fast and they're really pollution tolerant, really air pollution tolerant, which is why they became the tree of choice in American cities. So they imported a lot of green ash. And despite all these biocontrol agents naturally occurring in China, having co-evolved with the Chinese ash, the Manchurian ash there in China, within a couple of years of the North American green ash being planted along the highways in China, they were all killed by EAB. So even though there were all these pests that or predators and parasitoids and whatnot, regulators, you would think of EAB there, they could basically do nothing about it there. On the other hand, they don't, EAB does not ravage the native Chinese ash. So what you have there is the combination of the genetic resistance providing this foundation, which makes it hard for these bugs to have a big impact, and also the biocontrol on top. So what we hope ultimately happens is a recreation of that kind of natural situation where you have that biocontrol, and we're all in favor of biocontrol, exerting some limitation from above, and also this regulation from below from resistance. And the fact of the matter is the trees here largely don't have resistance, right? Because they didn't have to. They didn't have that evolutionary pressure to have it. So the EAB coming here is now giving those trees the kick to have to, the kick in the rump of the tree to try and get, from generation to generation to evolve that resistance. And we're helping that along. And then it'll be great if there's successful biocontrol, because resistance doesn't operate in a vacuum, right? It's like functional resistance. And so you can demonstrate a high level of resistance to something when there's a very few of those pests there, right? But if there's a lot more of the pests, your resistance will be lower. I say that it's like, being very healthy and so forth in out in the woods in the beautiful area of New Hampshire we are here, and then you go and ride in a Boston subway or New York City subway for 5 minutes, you'll probably get sick because you're just under this onslaught of pathogens from every direction. So you want to depress those populations of the bugs that are attacking the trees. So that's the first thing about how they can interact. So we're completely in favor of it. The second thing is that although we originally came up with this monitoring plot program to try and find those areas that are ready to look for resistant trees, it actually, because we have all these standardized monitoring plots across multiple states and multiple habitats and different species of ash and so forth, what we're also getting is data from the plots that we can derive from them different influences on these mortality trajectories for the trees, including environmental influences, particular stressors and so forth. But also we can probably get some really interesting data of the efficacy of EAB biocontrol on ultimately the health and mortality of the ash trees. Well, how can we do this? Because there's a database out there that shows everywhere where there have been parasitoid releases, and it shows how successful they've been in establishing them and what particular species were released. And we can kind of take that map layer and then look at where we have our monitoring plots and see if there seems to be a relationship where if you're near a successful biocontrol release point, if the mortality trajectory is slower or probably not faster. It's certainly fine to have a MaMA plot near a biocontrol release site. And the biocontrols are successful to the extent that they become well established. Where we're based in the Hudson Valley region, there's been lots of biocontrol release, and they have not confined themselves to where they were released. They're almost omnipresent. So they're out there, which means they're able to sustain a population to some extent. There's equivocal evidence, I'd say, in terms of how effective they are. But I don't think anyone would claim that they're getting rid of EAB and they're completely suppressing it. So what we'll probably find is that they're like retarding the mortality trajectory. So instead of the trees dying over, I'm just throwing out a number, they're 4 to 8 years, maybe, I'm completely making up these numbers, 8 to 16 years or something like that. And those are data that can emerge actually from our monitoring plots. So we see all these different approaches to confronting and dealing with EAB all having to work together.
Yeah, thanks. So on the subject of other stressors, there's a question about kind of previous things affecting ash trees The question is about ash yellowing, which cause mortality from multiple factors.
Right.
And is that a kind of factor in all, or maybe I guess the way to put it is, what role do other stressors play in what we're thinking about? And can you talk a little bit more about the ash yellow?
I'll talk about ash yellows, which is a big, I don't know how much you paid these people to ask these questions. But they're all right on the money. And so first, getting back to that, giving like the human example of how our resistance is, how it functions, or even if you have some genetic resistance conferred upon you, the same thing, if you pulled a bunch of all-nighters, that's when you're going to get sick, right? If you're hale and hearty, you're not going to get it. So regardless of your genetics, right? So it's the same thing for trees. So any other factor that's stressing them, whether it be pollution or paving over their roots or something like that. One thing that we see, for instance, is like white ash, which typically prefer fairly dry habitats relative to other ash. So black ash are in swamps, green ash are in floodplains, white ash can be, way up in the upland in ridges and so forth. That you will have white ash that occur along the edges of beaver swamps. And the white ash are stressed because it's already too wet for white ash. But they've been living, they've been able to hang on until the EAB comes along. And once the EAB hit white ash, in a beaver swamp or along the edge, they will succumb incredibly quickly. So that's an example of a stressor that really accelerates the mortality for them. As far as ash yellows, I love hearing about and talking about ash yellows because ash yellows there are a couple of different terms that are thrown around there. There's something that was observed, which is called ash decline. Which some people use synonymously with ash yellows. And ash yellows has a lot of the same symptoms actually as produced by EAB. You'll get vertical splits in the bark, you'll get crown dieback and thinning where the crowns start dying back on the trees. And you'll also get these what are called epicormic shoots, these weird little shoots that start growing out of the sides of the trees. And so two things. One, ash yellows was considered a really bad problem back probably, I don't know, in like the 80s or 90s. And there were all these publications about how ash yellows is this terrible thing. But ash yellows was causing this decline, right, over the course of years. That's much slower than what's happened with EAB. And everybody's almost forgotten about ash yellows when EAB came along because it's just so much more serious. And another thing is when EAB first showed up in Michigan and people were reporting our ash trees are dying, this really horrible, terrible thing is happening, they were poo-pooed by the extension offices there in Michigan who were saying, oh, we know all about it, it's ash yellows. And it wasn't until somebody split open, peeled the bark off a log, off a tree, and found an adult EAB that was about to emerge from it. They said, wow, it seems like this is an ash yellows. It's this beetle. And ash yellows is affected by other stressors, right? So there's a microorganism that's involved, but pollution and other stressors kind of accelerate the decline. But again, it's nowhere near as bad as EAB. Ash yellows is endemic throughout much of the Northeast and upper Midwest. Much of New York has it. So how does that complicate things? It complicates things for us a few ways. One is that we get reports all the time of all our ash are dead, they've all been killed by EAB, and it'll turn out it's an area that EAB has not even reached yet, right? And so there's a lot of confusion and people just attribute everything to EAB. So if you're trying to manage your ash, it's really good to know what's killing your ash. So another plug for the mortality monitoring plots, the MaMA monitoring plots network, is it makes you go out there and collect this intensive data from your trees and really become one with them. And in the course of doing that, people will discover, oh, I've looked at 40 trees and there's no evidence of EAB, and it'll turn out it was ash yellow. So that's one aspect of it. The other aspect is an issue comes up if you don't want to be shipping around, cyan collected or something from something that's infected with ash yellows to then spread that. But the third thing is that if you're in an area, say where we are in Hudson Valley, where there has historically been a lot of ash yellows, and there's EAB on top of it, and you're finding trees that are really healthy, those are probably really great trees that are resistant or
Yeah.
against both of those.
Yeah, yeah. And it looks like there's more demand for the Massachusetts action map. So the other part of the question is EAB in Eastern Massachusetts now? Because I will say that the most recent maps
Yes.
I've seen didn't include the Cape.
So we can share, so there's two, it just doesn't have ash. So,
Oh, that's
so the thing is, and the same thing happens in, in New York, you look on Long Island, or, you get to the coastal plain, I won't say there are no ash, but there's very few.
Right.
So, and there's not, and to the extent there's EAB out there, there's not a lot of people looking for it probably.
Right. So maybe there's some like landscape trees, but there's not really like forest
Right.
level ash trees.
It's not a big concern. There could be some, again, planted in towns and so forth, and we'll share our Massachusetts map, which is based on the latest state agency data.
Yeah, great.
Just a note for
Radka,
Massachusetts
come
that the, just because of the data that are available from plots that Dr. Orvik has, that it seemed that the mortality, at least from those data, is slower. So the map of Massachusetts, if you look at the legend, is a little bit different because it seems like the decline is slower, at least for the white ash there.
So just to clarify who Dave Orwig is, so Dave Orwig is an amazing forest ecologist who does a lot of research. He's based at Harvard Forest and has we've collaborated with him on some stuff, and he's shared his data for some ash monitoring plots that he has in certain areas of Massachusetts, and they seem to show a much slower decline. It's a very small number of plots. He's unsure if it's, and there's a very wide scatter. Some are show fast decline, some show slow, and he shared his data with us. And our data also suggests that the decline, at least in parts of New York, is slower than in what's generally known from the Midwest. There, as I mentioned before, there's likely variation which can be based on the broader genetics and also can be based on environmental variation. So this is something we've discussed a lot, which is originally we were just using these standardized curves based on what was known from the Midwest. And as we found things going, maybe somewhat slower in New York, we've kind of slowed these curves a bit, and also for Massachusetts. Where you get to that Massachusetts border area, we don't want to have something where, you're a tree on 4 inches on one side of the border and you're going to decline 2 years faster than the other. Yeah. So we've actually, rather than conforming directly to Dave Orwig's data, which things can go and maybe really slow, we've kind of slowed things a bit, but we feel it's better getting people out to search earlier and not missing it. And if they go out there and are they're doing their rapid ash mortality assessments and finding that things are nowhere near this 95% threshold, then that's information is really important to us. And it says, what Dave Orwig is finding is probably more generalizable. Yeah. And these things are slower. And one of the things that's really important from this is that I think there's the perception that EAB shows up and bam, everything just dies right away. And I think if trees are dying more slowly, on the population level, maybe some individuals die fast, some die slower, that it doesn't mean it's nothing to worry about. It means that maybe when you're projecting kind of your management timeline and what's going to happen next and how much time do I have to respond, maybe you have more time. Yeah.
So we've gone over time, but I really want to ask one of my questions.
No, I'm sorry. We have to go somewhere.
So my question is, if you know, or if you've worked with partners who know whether the sort of lingering black or brown ash are still viable for basket making, or whether even having to fight off making those calluses, whether that affects the ability to pound the ash and have those splits come apart.
So a great question, and you so my thought would be that those trees are maintaining their health, right? And the problem is a highly infested ash tree. They're really messed up for any purpose, right? So these trees that are healthy, retaining their health, are probably better for as basket trees. But then there's that balancing, right? if these trees are a very small number of trees have that resistance. So one way to look at it, and this is how we all have to work together when we approach it from a cultural perspective and ecological perspective and economic and how these all fit together. So one thing that can be done is once lingering ash are identified and scion are collected from them and you're cloning them, you then have all those mini-me's. You have all those, and then potentially you can, you can harvest that parent tree, right?
Right, or even, wait it out and harvest to have like a scion as your.
Eventually, maybe if it turns out that way, that would be
Yeah.
great. And the other thing that you can do, as I mentioned, you can do, so we don't want you, until a tree is validated, and is reported and validated as a lingering ash, we don't want you to inject it with the pesticides that will maintain its health, because it may be the pesticides that are making it seem like a lingering ash.
Right.
But once something has been validated as a lingering ash, we actually then encourage you to go out and inject it, because again, usually that resistance is only partial and that tree will also eventually die. So if you maintain that tree in the landscape, then it can furnish seed, it can improve the genetics around, it can also provide all those ecological benefits of having ash out there. And for black ash maintain the hydrology. So black ash act like giant soda straws that are transpiring water out of their leaves, sucking all this water out of the swamp that they're in, right? To enable photosynthesis, and then it comes out as water vapor into the atmosphere. And you remove those black ash trees and you don't have other trees there. What happens is those straws are no longer sucking that water out. The water level rises, and what had been a swamp becomes a body of open water, it becomes a pond or a lake, and then no trees. That's a point of no return. And you can't get other trees established there.
Right.
So the black ash are really important in maintaining that habitat. So in terms of the basket trees, and we really it's extremely important. One of the things that actually motivates us in this whole project is not just the ecological consequences of the loss of ash, but the cultural consequences. So I think it's really important to maintain that tradition of basket making and that a generation doesn't lose, that link in the chain isn't lost. But I think that the ways to do that, there are ways to do that instead of saying, this is a lingering ash, let's just cut it down right now to make that. I don't think anybody who has that long-term perspective would do. I think there are ways to do it, to collect the scion from it, to then inject it to, if you want to have it there, or potentially then cut it. But it's such a small handful of trees that are likely to turn out to be those lingering ash.
Right. Okay. Well, thank you again. Thank you all for joining us online, for your great questions. Those of you in person, it's great to have you here, and looking forward to learning more tomorrow.